So if you're aiming to be the next Bill Gates or, the next Mark Zuckerberg, the argument is you've already failed. That's the core idea we're exploring today.
Mm.
Real business success isn't about mimicking the giants of the past. It's about finding that one truly new thing.
Exactly. We're diving deep into Peter Thiel's framework from 0 to 1. We're focusing on how genuine value gets created, not just copied. And this framework really draws a sharp line between two kinds of progress that, well, define the modern business landscape.
Right. So on one side, you've got what he calls one-to-end progress. This is like horizontal progress, extensive. It's about copying things that already work.
Yeah, taking something proven, maybe a successful restaurant or a factory layout, and just, stamping out 10 more somewhere else. That's what we often call globalization.
But then there's the other kind, the really transformative kind, 0 to 1 progress. This is vertical, intense. It's creation, inventing something fundamentally new, a single act of radical novelty.
And that, the sources argue, is the only way to genuinely create new wealth, not just rearrange existing wealth.
Yeah. And the argument laid out is pretty stark. Without investing in that really hard, often painful process of creating new things, hitting that 0 to 1 mark, companies, maybe even whole nations, will eventually stagnate and fail. We can't just keep tweaking the business models we inherited, right?
It's fascinating how the sources frame globalization in this context. They see it on its own as unsustainable, especially in a world where resources are finite. Technology, that human knack for invention, for doing more with less, that's what lets us sort of break free from those Malthusian traps. It's the miracle we need.
So our mission for this deep dive is really to try and figure out the patterns. What do successful people do to find value where others don't look? How do they think from first principles instead of just, following a recipe? How do you actually stop copying and start creating?
Well, the first step to making that leap, according to Thiel, is you have to think clearly about the future. And the future, by definition, has to look different from today. If your vision of the future looks basically the same, just scaled up, you're still in that 1 to N world.
Okay, and this brings us neatly to that famous contrarian question he apparently uses in interviews. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
It sounds simple, doesn't it? But it demands extreme intellectual honesty and, frankly, courage. Most answers people give are apparently pretty bad. Things like, oh, our education system is broken, or America is exceptional.
Why are those bad answers?
Well, because tons of people agree with them already, or they're just well-worn debates, familiar territory. A good answer, Thiel says, needs a specific structure. Something like, most people believe X is true, but the real truth is the opposite of X.
So it has to be something you genuinely believe based on your own thinking that goes against the grain. A real secret about how the world works.
Exactly. But think about that. If all the accepted wisdom is taught in schools or written down, how does anyone even arrive at such a contrarian insight? Where does that genius come from?
It seems to demand this ability to just completely step outside of received wisdom, doesn't it? And Thiel actually offers his own answer to the question, which ties right back into this core idea of creation versus replication.
Right. His big contrarian truth is this. Most people think the future of the world will be defined mainly by globalization. But the real truth, he argues, is that technology matters more.
Okay, wow. That definitely reframes the whole global picture. How so? What are the implications?
You see the stakes almost immediately. The sources point out that just spreading old ways of doing things, old technologies globally, will lead to disaster, not prosperity. For example, if China simply doubles its energy production using today's coal tech, well, it doubles its air pollution. Catastrophic. Or if India's hundreds of millions of households start consuming like Americans using today's tools, the environmental impact is unthinkable.
So globalization, that one-to-end process, is actually a recipe for environmental collapse unless we constantly inject new, better technologies, the 0 to 1 breakthroughs.
Precisely. It highlights the absolute necessity of technological progress.
Which gives us a really sharp definition of what a startup truly is in this context. It's not just any small business.
Yeah.
It's the largest group of people you can convince to join you on a plan to build a different future.
Exactly. Their key strength is that they provide a space, hopefully, to question those received ideas, to rethink business from the ground up, from first principles.
Okay, so if 0 to 1 thinking is so critical, why is it so hard? Why do so many businesses default to 1 to N? To understand that, the sources suggest we need to look back, specifically at the shadow cast by the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s.
Ah, yes, that period. Roughly, September 1998 to March 2000, a really short, intense burst of mania. But you have to understand the context that fed into it. The 90s actually started pretty sluggishly. There was a recession, slow recovery, a lot of anxiety about globalization even then. And then you had these major global crises happening right alongside the internet boom. The East Asian financial crisis in 97, the Russian ruble crisis in 98, the near meltdown of long-term capital management. Even skepticism about the euro launching in 99, it felt like the old economy was struggling, maybe failing, to cope with global complexities.
So, against that backdrop, the internet and the new economy start to look like, well, maybe the only path forward, almost by default.
That's the argument. It wasn't just optimism. It was partly a belief that the old ways weren't working. And this led to this, frankly, bizarre anti-business model phase where things like profit seemed quaint, old-fashioned.
Yeah, the conventional wisdom suddenly prioritized things like page views, eyeballs, rapid scaling over actual earnings. It sounds crazy now,
Yeah.
but it was the accepted logic.
Absolutely. And the PayPal story from the source material is a perfect, almost textbook example of this era's dynamics. Their initial goal was incredibly ambitious, pure 0 to 1, create a totally new internet currency to maybe even replace the US dollar.
But their first attempt at a product was
Yep.
less than successful.
Oh, massively. Letting people beam money between Palm Pilots, it got voted one of the 10 worst business ideas of 1999, a total flop. So they pivoted, quite smartly, to email payments. That worked much better, but then they hit another huge hurdle. How do you get enough users for a payment network to actually be useful? They needed critical mass, like a million users fast.
And their solution was just peep bubble thinking, wasn't it?
Completely. They literally paid people to join. $10 for signing up, another $10 you've referred a friend.
Wow. That burning cash at an incredible rate. How did that even work?
Well, it did cause exponential growth in users, but also obviously exponential growth in cost. They were bleeding money. They absolutely needed more capital just to survive their own growth strategy. And the timing was, well, legendary. They managed to raise $100 million in March 2000.
March 2000. It's literally the month the NASDAQ peaked, right?
Yeah.
At over 5,000.
Exactly. Peak insanity. That funding round basically bought them the runway they needed to survive the crash that followed immediately after and eventually figure out how to turn that user base into a profitable business.
It's a wild story.
Yeah.
But you can see how, after the crash, people looked back at things like PayPal paying users and thought, see, this whole aggressive growth, sales-focused thing was just unsustainable bubble madness.
Precisely. The market reaction was severe. The NASDAQ didn't bottom out until late 2002, down near 1,100, a massive drop. And this crash wasn't just seen as a market correction. It felt like a kind of moral judgment on the tech sector's ambition. Optimism got replaced by fear, deep skepticism.
And that fear, Thiel argues, solidified into 4 key dogmas, 4 widely accepted lessons learned from the crash that still heavily influence how many startups operate even today.
Right. And if you genuinely want to build the future, if you want to break free from just copying and actually create something new, 0 to 1, you first have to recognize these dogmas for what they are, reactions born of fear, and then you have to consciously reject them.
Okay, let's break them down. What's the first dogma that emerged from the crash?
The first one is all about caution. The accepted wisdom became, make incremental advances. Big, grand visions are seen as reckless, dangerous. Only small, safe, iterative steps are okay.
Sounds sensible, almost prudent after a crash. But what's the 0 to 1 counter principle?
The counter is, it is better to risk boldness than triviality. Because if you're only making tiny, incremental changes, you're essentially just making a slightly better version of what someone else already does. You haven't created a new market. You haven't solved a unique problem. You're stuck competing on minor features, which isn't where the big value lies.
Okay, that makes sense. Risking triviality means you might succeed, but the success is small. Risking boldness means failure is possible, but success is transformative. What's the second dogma?
The second one relates to planning, or rather, the lack of it. The lesson learned was stay lean and flexible. Planning ahead was seen as arrogant, rigid. Entrepreneurship should be like agnostic experimentation. Try stuff, see what works, pivot constantly.
The lean startup model, in a way. Again, sounds adaptable. What's wrong with that?
Well, from a 0 to 1 perspective, if you have no plan, no guiding vision, how can you possibly build something radically different? The counter principle here is stark. A bad plan is better than no plan. A plan, even a flawed one that needs adjusting, gives you direction, a hypothesis about the future. Endless flexibility without a core vision just means you're reacting, not leading. You can't build a different future by accident.
Right. You need a destination, even if the route changes.
Okay,
Dogma number 3.
This one seems very practical, almost common sense business advice. Improve on the competition. Find an existing market, identify customer pain points with current products, and build something slightly better.
That sounds like, well, just good business, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Address a known need.
It sounds like it, but Thiel argues it's the ultimate trap if you want to create lasting value. It's pure one-to-end thinking. The zero-to-one counter is competitive markets destroy profits. If your whole strategy is just being slightly better than the other guy, you're locked in a battle for tiny margins. Everyone's product looks similar, prices get driven down, it's a race to the bottom.
So real value comes from escaping competition altogether.
Exactly. By creating something unique, something only you can offer. Think monopolies, but monopolies built on innovation, not shady dealings. That's where sustainable profits and real value creation happen.
Okay, powerful point. And the final dogma, number 4. This one seems directly related to that PayPal anecdote.
It is. The lesson drawn was focus on product, not sales. The thinking was if your product is truly revolutionary, it should sell itself. Growth has to be organic, viral. Spending heavily on sales and marketing was seen as artificial, a wasteful relic of the bubble days.
Build it and they will come fallacy.
Pretty much. And Thiel argues this is maybe the most dangerous dogma of all for tech founders who often love building things but hate selling them. The counter-principle is absolute. Sales matters just as much as product. You can have the most brilliant, world-changing technology, but if you can't figure out how to distribute it, how to explain its value, how to actually sell it, it's worthless in practical terms.
So technology and sales are like multipliers. 0 times a billion is still 0.
Perfect analogy. Both are absolutely necessary for zero-to-one success. You need the invention and you need the distribution.
Okay, so summing this up, there's this real tension. The late 90s, yes, is a period of wild excess, maybe even insanity in some ways, but Thiel also calls it a peak of clarity, a moment when people genuinely understood how desperately the world needed new, valuable technology. We needed 0-to-1 breakthroughs.
Right. We need to somehow recapture that clarity of vision, that ambition, without repeating the madness and the mistakes. And the path to doing that involves consciously rejecting these 4 post-crash dogmas that were born out of fear and overreaction.
It means embracing boldness over incrementalism, having a plan even if it's imperfect, aiming to create new markets instead of fighting in old ones, and respecting sales and distribution as much as product development.
Precisely. And it circles back to that contrarian thinking. The real power isn't just about disagreeing with the crowd for the sake of it. It's about developing the ability to think for yourself from the ground up, questioning assumptions. Because the ultimate paradox here is that if there were a simple formula for innovation, following it wouldn't actually produce an innovation. Because every true 0-to-1 creation is, by definition, new and unique.
So the core takeaway for you listening is that real progress, that 0-to-1 leap, demands questioning the ideas we take for granted, recognizing that just copying existing models, the one-to-end path, is ultimately a dead end.
And we've seen that the fundamental engine for future prosperity has to be technological advancement, creating new ways of doing things, not just spreading the old ways everywhere through globalization.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to consider. Our modern society, much of its wealth, was built on an incredible waves of technological progress, thinking industrial revolution through, say, the mid-20th century, roughly 1760s to maybe 1970.
An era of relentless invention across many fields. But since then, arguably, the really dramatic 0-to-1 progress has been concentrated, mostly in computers, IT, communications.
Which means vast, crucial sectors of our economy might still be running largely on technologies and systems inherited from that mid-century peak. They haven't seen their 0-to-1 revolution yet.
They're ripe for disruption, you could say, stuck in maybe inefficient, competitive one-to-end loops.
So the question to leave you with is this. Think about the massive industries that shape our daily lives: transportation, energy, construction, manufacturing, maybe even education or healthcare. Which one of these huge established sectors, still reliant on older ways of doing things, do you think is most urgently awaiting its own 0-to-1 technological miracle today? Where is the biggest opportunity for truly transformative change?